Hello everyone, Luark/Wiso here, and I'm making a video about a thread that recently came to my attention on Reddit that's about potential improvements and suggestions for WoW that could make it a better game for everyone. This post comes to me from Deepshades. He is a warlock from Method who has been high-end rating for quite some time, in addition to having experience in high-level Mythic Plus. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything that this guy has said, but I do think there are some important points that he makes and some aspects of the game that could do with some improvement and that I might like to see. And maybe after watching this, you'll have some thoughts of your own and share them, and then maybe we can see what we can come up with. It'd be really cool to see some of these implemented, and some of these I really don't think it's worthwhile or is gonna even be considered. But anyway, let's get started. In this first section, Deepshades talks about the changes to the talent system and the overuse of ability pruning. His first cite is the MOP talents versus the now Legion talents for warlocks, specifically Affliction. In MOP, you have your utility talents and survivability talents, and then 2 tiers of damage and playstyle talents. Whereas in Legion, you have your damage talents on the first tier, some situational talents for damage in the second tier, some CC/movement talents in the third tier, another set of situational damage talents in the fourth tier, the fifth tier again being survivability, the sixth tier being damage/playstyle talents, and the last tier more damage/playstyle talents. The problem with the Legion setup in his mind is that MOP, you got to choose which things helped you based on what you were doing, and you really just complemented your already balanced and designed class. In the Legion talent system, you're more of playing Bob the Builder and trying to figure out what you need for what and what are you going to specialize in. He feels that this closes a lot of doors having to specialize in either AoE or single target damage with RNG in between. The Empowered Life Tap is only good for Mythic Plus, as well as Absolute Corruption being only useful for either Mythic Plus in combination with Sow the Seeds, or in multi-target fights that you're going to have Corruption on for most of the encounter, if not a large portion. Phantom Singularity is almost all but worthless in a lot of cases, and Soul Harvest is the clear choice now. Phantom Singularity for a long time was the go-to choice because there was really nothing else except for Sow the Seeds in Mythic Plus. Soul Harvest is now useful, which is good, but again, this is all really situational stuff. Demonic Circle in the third tier was actually baseline for a long time, and now that it is a talent, it's just another thing taken away, and another thing that we have to choose for. Demon Skin used to be Fell Bulwark, and it was a passive/buff for a while. Burning Rush and Dark Pact, again, have been talents. Grimoire of Supremacy, Service, and Sacrifice have not changed. Not a big deal that it hasn't changed, but being that you have to spec yourself for certain things, and Supremacy really only being the good option, there's not many choices here. You can think there's choices, you may want to believe, and you can play with these different choices here, but there's only really one that's worthwhile. Demonology, Service, and Supremacy and whatnot, that can be kind of changed. Same with Destruction, but really Supremacy is the good one. Again, Demonology excluded. Death's Embrace is OP for many encounters. Life and Life was really just an old little dot that made you, have some healing because you didn't have a filler spell like Drain Soul that would heal for you, and then Soul Conduit just feels bad a lot of the time because you'll end up doing good damage with a lot of procs and abysmal damage with almost no procs. And there's a lot of high and dry phases where you're going back and forth. And then sometimes there's whole boss fights where you get a steady stream of Soul Shard procs, but then there's other fights where you get them with nothing, and that just does not feel good. Moving on, he feels like Blizzard has started removing abilities because they were already perfect and didn't need anything, and the only way to introduce new things was to remove old things. It really turned out that they kept losing abilities and didn't get anything in return. Mist of Pandaria and Legion have basically, between these two expansions, we have lost 15 spells, and he goes on to list them here. Mist of Pandaria, we had Shadowburn, Demonic Circle, Fire and Brimstone, Dark Soul Instability, which is now Soul Harvest, Ember Tap, Fell Flame, Twilight Ward, Dark Intent, Curse of Elements, Curse of Weakness, Fell Armor, Demon Armor, Flames of Zoroth, Howling Fear, and Soul Shatter. All of those are virtually gone in some respect. Some of them have become PvP talents, which in my mind, unless you PvP, and even then those are some situational ones, they're pointless. They're useless. I mean, what good are they if you can't use them and they're locked behind honor, levels? Again, he reiterates the same thing I had just said about the classes being way too RNG dependent, like Reap Souls, Soul Conduit, and Unstable Affliction resets. Classes shouldn't be able to do 2.5 million damage or 1.5 million damage when pushing the same buttons. He goes on to say that if he plays his rotation correctly, he wants to be rewarded with doing good damage. That should be the way things go. You get rewarded for playing your class well, knowing the mechanics, and handling them like you should. You should not be rewarded because of some stupid RNG mechanic that makes you great one pull, but absolute garbage the next pull. It's just dumb. I don't understand why Blizzard did that. So I agree with most of this. All right, moving into the rating section. He thinks that there should only be 2 difficulties. He agrees that people should have a chance to see everything. I do think that there should be challenging content that not everybody can do within a few pulls. In my opinion, challenging content motivates people to get better, and that results them in them playing more. Here's my idea: there should only be 2 difficulties, like back in Wrath of the Lich King. Heroic should start at the difficulty like the 7th or 8th boss, currently in normal, around the same boss in Heroic. Mythic should start where the new Heroic ends, and should finish on a difficulty like Lei Shen, Blackhand, or Archimond. I can't believe that anybody enjoys killing bosses like Desolate Host or Fallen Avatar and looking for raid where half the boss is missing. Blizzard would have more time again tuning the bosses and making proper difficulty curve within the dungeon. I don't know that made a lot of sense, but I will break it down for you. Basically, what Deepshade is saying here with this raid section is that while he agrees that there should be a chance for people to see high-end content, that maybe not necessarily everyone should be able to do it. And that's where the difficulty and skill kind of comes in to this. He believes that the scaling for boss difficulty should be somewhere around the 7th or 8th boss currently in normal and end around the same boss in heroic. Mythic should start where the heroic ends and should finish on a difficulty like Lei Shen, Blackhand, and Archimond. So for those of you who haven't experienced those bosses, I suggest you go back and maybe watch some videos or look at Wowhead or something to see what those bosses were like. This also means that LFR would be taken out of the picture. LFR bosses, like in his example, Desolate Host and Fallen Avatar, are pretty much shells of what a boss should be. They're pretty much half of the encounter. I don't think LFR is good because it is toxic. There's a lot of people who don't care, don't want to listen to anyone's direction, even if people are just being nice about it. And it's more of an excuse for people to just throw themselves at a boss and hoping they get loot. Honestly, I really think it's used for just welfare gear or to gear alts. There's really no purpose for it. Yes, people want to see the content and they want to see themselves kill the big bad boss, but very much like his potential solution in having a story mode, I think that would be the best bet, where people can queue or do this sort of scenario where they don't have to sit in a long queue time based on their, them playing DPS or what have you. They wouldn't have to have any real knowledge of the mechanics. It wouldn't matter how good or bad they are. They could all do it and they could see it, and it would be some similarity to actually doing the raid content like the rest of the player base. LFR just doesn't provide a good entry level experience for raiding. That is what guilds should be for, and communities, but more so guilds. Communities are okay. I don't really think that they should be much of a thing, but that seems to be Blizzard's, next step is another nail in the guild coffin. But that's another topic. He would also like to see smaller raids brought back, similar to Karazhan, Zulaman, Skullomance in the old days, and Blackrock Depths in the old days. Those were, small 10-man raids, and maybe throw in a few timed, rewards, kind of like in Zulaman, where if you cleared through the first few bosses quick enough and you got to the bear boss, the mount would drop, and that might be something more interesting for people to do. Onward to the dungeons and so on section. In this section, he would like to see Mythic Plus, he thinks is great. He would like to have some changes as to how the key scaling goes. In this case, it would be in regards to as you progress with leveling up your key, things are more likely to one-shot you, even if you handle the mechanics correctly, just because of how high they are scaled. This feels bad, and instead he suggests that you focus more on the time, whereas if you do a 15, say it lasts for 33 minutes, that's your timer to complete the key. Maybe at 20 to complete the key, it maybe be 30 minutes. Shave some time off. Keep the damage scaling based on your health. That way you don't have to necessarily worry about regular non-lethal mechanics suddenly becoming lethal. And it's more about how fast you complete the dungeon. That would mean people would spend more time focusing on strategy than how can they cheese certain things to get past this and make the dungeon get done, regardless. For dungeons, he'd like to see more dungeons come out. Just in general, more dungeons would keep people interested. Skittish, he doesn't like that affix. He thinks it doesn't play well because there's no real way to counter it. And I mentioned earlier in the class section, Warlocks used to have Soul Shatter. That's one of those utility spells that could become, or could currently be useful if it had not been pruned. Going and changing other affixes so that they don't require any specific type of class or composition would be much more beneficial than having something, again, like Skittish, that there's not a real counter to. You would also like to see for keystone upgrades that you could pick maybe one of 3 dungeons. That way it's not completely random, and some weeks you just don't complete a key because you got a really bad upgrade. Time trials, it would most likely end up being an automated system that Blizzard would have to implement and then maintain, that you could queue as solo or as a group and compete against people in sort of like a smaller MDI kind of contest. It would be beneficial for streamers and their community to get people active and playing together. It has special rewards of some kind, maybe a currency or a toy or title or whatever. And in my opinion, this, while it sounds good, I don't think it's good for WoW. Only because they would have to have a dedicated team to focus on the system behind automating this kind of player challenge, because they'd be competing. It's a little different than an MMR bracket that you pair people with based on what their assigned score is. That's a little different. Moving on to the Mythic Plus League, this would be something that everybody can do. Obviously, it would be narrowed down over time. Start out with, say, 20 teams from every region, and then over the season, you acquire points, and then the top 8 from each region gets to go to, or has a playoffs, and then those top teams go and meet for a grand final. This, to me, sounds a lot like something the Overwatch League or League of Legends spring and summer splits kind of do for each of their seasons. This would be something that Blizzard would need a whole separate esports, essentially, because that's what this would be, team for to manage, and I don't think that is necessarily worthwhile, because I don't know that they would be making much more money just by implementing in something like this. I think the MDI is a good start. I would like to see some expansion and some see it come more often than, say, once a year. But this is only the second time they've done it, and I think it'll be pretty interesting. I think they can build on it. I'm interested to see what next expansion is going to be like. Solo challenges, he thinks they're great. I think they're great. I had a lot of fun doing most of them, although scaling for some of the tank ones could be better. Some of the cheese the tanks can do, monks and druids especially, that should be taken a look at, and that should have been noticed and maybe play tested a little bit more. That way the drastic difficulty between a monk and a prot warrior, or a druid and a prot paladin, wasn't there. Finally, time walking, he feels it's bad, not fun, and the nostalgia that it's supposed to bring back, it doesn't bring back, and I have to agree. The nostalgia is, you want it, you kind of feel it going in, but then you're just let down, because it's more or less you're going through a long walk down memory lane with some attractions here and there. Like, there's a boss, Terran Gorfine, the first Death Knight. There's a giant Abyssal. There's Akama. There's Illidan. He's a shade of his former strength. He's in pushover now, and it's not fun. I was really looking forward to the difficulty with the time walking raids and teaching some of the new players that are on my raid team how the mechanics are supposed to happen, so that they could enjoy, what Black Temple has to offer, even if it is a scaled, slightly easier version. But it wasn't even that. You go in, you pop hero, and you kill everything. There's nothing else to do. Well, you get a bunch of junk, and then you're like, That was a waste of an hour. So yeah, I'm pretty sad about that. But anyway, let's keep going. So in this next part, he talks about the reward system and how he thinks that certain things could be improved. There are raids, Mythic Plus, Arena, and rated battlegrounds. In the rating section, he thinks that there should be more mounts and titles awarded to players that clear the content. And one of his examples is having a mount maybe for like the first 200 players that clear early on should get this some kind of reward or title. Um, Mythic Plus gear should scale better than it does right now on the live version. You could introduce something like a chest at the end that gives you currency to buy bonus rolls or materials, flasks, that kind of thing. And it should grant you a teleport like it used to. That part I agree with. I miss having the teleport to the challenge mode dungeons when we would do them. There should also be titles like in Mists and Warlords for the people that are fastest and the highest server key. Seasonal rewards like Arena with mounts and titles for certain percent of the player base would also be interesting. After a season, you get a certain amount of coins and can buy items like transmog, weapons, enchants, toys, and fun and items Blizzard could develop. Arena, nothing to really complain about. Maybe make it easier to target certain pieces of gear. I don't really think that's necessary. Rated Battleground, same title as before. Since the last 10 seasons, and a weapon enchant that switches every expansion. Rated Battleground should have the same reward system as Arena. That I kind of agree with. And then he goes on to say Mythic Plus should be like PvP in seasons with rewards. Top 1% and 5% get specific titles and mounts. Every players that participate in Mythic Plus season get a special currency. This currency allows people to buy things. So with this, I don't particularly agree. I think that having a Realm First title for different things like killing a boss, a raid tier, end tier boss is great. I think having the Mistwalker title for getting a Realm Best like there was in Mists for challenge modes, I think that's also great. Not just because I got one. I worked my butt off to get it in the last few weeks leading up to the patch. Sadly, it's on my shaman, but I don't think that Blizzard needs to invest resources in making more special items for the top 1 or 5%. I'm not saying this because I'm not in the top 1 or 5%. I'm just saying that I don't think it's necessary. But what he's trying to get to is the prestige of doing these feats. In a sense that back in the day, if you had a specific armor set or an old legendary weapon or the Realm First title or a mount like Scarab Lord or something, you had a certain prestige about that character. You could look at them and say, wow, this guy has done hard content and looks like he's worked his butt off to get it. Yeah, sure, great. I think that's good. But, I mean, playing to the top percentage where 95% of the player base won't get anything for doing the same content, just not necessarily as early on, is a bit much. Being in Method, being in Limit, being in Exorcist, wherever you say that name, that has prestige in and of itself because players know that you are some of the best out there and that if they want to get the same things and have that prestige, then they need to improve themselves to try and get on your level. I don't think having a mount or an extra title or something like that is really going to fix that. I don't see the sense in it unless you just kind of wanting another way to say, hey, look, I'm better than you. And I don't think it's necessary. Sure, Blizzard could make things kind of retain their prestige a little longer. Kind of like, again, Realm First titles were a good example of this because those titles were special. They were separate from the titles that you got from killing the boss. And then, you could wear them and say, hey, look, I killed this, end rate tier boss before the majority of the population did. And I remember looking at people and seeing, oh man, they got this title from killing Algalon first, before any of the other the rest of the servers done it. That's really cool. Or anything like that. That has its own prestige. Yeah, there's a lot of new players in this game, and they don't want to understand it, and it's it dilutes over time, but that's just the nature of things. I don't think there's going to be any way to combat that unless you're constantly shouting, hey, look at me, hey, look at me, hey, look at me. But then at that point, people are just going to ignore you anyway. So this also plays into his other section about loot, trinkets, and Titan forging. In his loot section, he says that nowadays it feels like epic items have lost their meaning and you can get them anywhere, and that he thinks that they should kind of reduce the way epics are. I kind of agree, but it's kind of like a short-term expansion resolution, because everybody starts out in the beginning with blue items, and they might get some from heroics, like or regular mythics and stuff like that. But then by the midway through the expansion, pretty much everybody has epics. So I don't really know that trying to, renew the meaning of epic items is really worthwhile. It's not like back in vanilla where epics were very, very few and far between, and outside of world drops and some really high, end raid bosses and tiers, having them, really meant that you were the shit. And I don't think that's something that can come back, not at this stage of the game. Trinkets, scaling wise, things with internal cooldowns and on uses, I think that's great. He likes the Darkmoon cards from Mists. I do too. I thought they were great. But the ones that are kind of out now with like the blades, shadow blades that shoot out of you, or calling down a comet to deal some random damage, it just doesn't feel good. It kind of feels dumb. Some of them I think were done okay, and some of them are actually useful, but not really. I think it could be improved upon. Stastics, he doesn't mind so long as they don't end up like Unstable Arcano Crystal, which I agree with 100%. They should not end up like that. That was not good. And that it shouldn't be a focus for the designers to do. What kind of random shit can we put on trinkets to make them either hot garbage or absolutely godly? And this kind of goes into Titan forging and the way loot is. He's not saying Titan forging should be gone, but he's saying that it's a bit crazy, and I have to agree. Being able to Titan forge an item, say from 945, which is the heroic level of loot drop in Antorus, you don't count Argus, to up to 985 is pretty fucking nuts. I got a 980 relic on my Warlock, and I've gotten a 970 relic on my Warrior, and that's 30, 30 plus item levels in some cases on items. That's ridiculous. I'm cool with Warforging, where it's 5 or 10 item levels, maybe an extra tertiary stat, but 40? Come on. Keep the content relevant that's already out. Don't make it so that you can gear yourself to where a Mythic Raider is geared at with less content or lower quality content. It's just silly. Um, I think that's a big change that needs to happen. Absolutely. That's pretty much it that I wanted to cover. Everything else about, personal loot and racials, relinquished gear, one giant auction house, merging more servers and things. I think all of those are some good small suggestions that could result in quality of life improvements. Do I think they're really that big of a deal? Not so much. I think they could compound into solving a larger problem within the game, but really at this point, I think the class specialization, the way loot goes out, and how it's itemized, plus rating difficulties and rewards for those are a bit more important than some of these smaller ones. But in the description, there will be a link to this thread, and I really encourage you guys to read through it if you haven't, and then let me know in the comments what you think. I'd really like to see it. Although, please, trying to keep it, from at least something that makes sense. Don't just bitch about not having something or wanting to have something or wanting or not wanting something to be taken away that, this opinion post and my thoughts have somehow offended you by. Be smart, be articulate, and let's have an actual discussion. Thanks.